Hi, everybody. I'm Diane Brady. I'm here with Alan Dershowitz, noted lawyer, of course, longtime Harvard law professor, now emeritus, author of Get Trump. Alan, nice to see you.
My pleasure to be on with you. Thank you.
Let's start with this defamation case that you had against CNN that was overturned. I'm intrigued. Did you think that, what were the odds that you put on winning that case? You've done defamation cases in the past on behalf of clients.
Well, we always knew that we would lose at the district court level and that hopefully we would win at the appellate court or Supreme Court level. The judge who dismissed the trial admitted that the Supreme Court decision that required actual malice is unworkable. He condemned CNN for treating me wrongly, foolishly, and you could see he was very sympathetic. He praised me for bringing the case, but he said he was bound by the law. And so we're obviously going to be appealing and challenging the law and giving the Supreme Court an opportunity to reverse the actual malice standard. The irony is I was a law clerk on the Supreme Court at the time of New York Times versus Sullivan and helped draft Justice Goldberg's concurring opinion. But I've always had a problem with the actual malice requirement. It's impossible to prove. You have to get into people's minds. You know, what CNN did was, as the judge recognized, foolish and essentially outrageous.
So foolish and lazy.
A president could be impeached if he committed crimes, lawless conduct, unlawful conduct, improper conduct, corrupt conduct, and CNN turned it on its head, doctored the tape, and said that a president can't be impeached even if he commits crimes. So the judge recognized essentially that I had been defamed, but we couldn't get inside the heads of the people, and he had to rule that there was insufficient evidence to say that they subjectively knew that they were wrong when they made these statements. So we're looking forward to the appeal.
So, and this is just to remind people, this was stemming from your defense of President Trump during the first impeachment trial.
That's
basically.
Right. It was during the question and answer period, I was asked whether a quid pro quo could result in impeachment. And I said, depends. If it's a lawful quid pro quo, no. If it's an unlawful or illegal quid pro quo, yes. And CNN doctored the tape and took up those words: unlawful, illegal, and corrupt.
You know, one thing that intrigues me about this case, and I want to ask about the Dominion lawsuit as well with Fox News,
Sure.
but you know, when you think about the bar, you think the bar is too high? I mean, especially as somebody who has worked on these cases, you know, there's the First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, and I think what is the appropriate bar in this country for defamation? Because to your point, actual malice has certainly been seen as a factor that has protected, you know, freedom of the press at the very least.
Well, first of all, I think the issue should be left to the jury because it's an assessment of credibility. You have people sitting there and saying, oh, I really thought he said a president can commit a crime. Well, you know, a jury's not going to believe that. But a judge says, well, if he said it, there's no evidence specifically to contradict it. So I would send the issue of actual malice, if it remains, always to a jury. Second, I would reduce the standards of actual malice from reckless disregard for the truth to basically foolish disregard for the truth. And the judge found that what they did was foolish. But the line between foolish and reckless is the line between what's permissible and what's not permissible. And that kind of issue should always be left to a jury.
What do you think about the Dominion lawsuit that's now going on against Fox News? Different case, of course, and it's, you know, against me. But what is that a stronger case?
A small involvement in a case in the West where we're arguing that Dominion should not be able to sue for defamation unless they're willing to disclose their algorithms and how their system works. They're performing a government function, and they should be as transparent as the government to see whether or not there is a potential for hacking. I do not believe the election was rigged. I think the election was appropriately decided. but I'm concerned about the use of machines where the machine companies won't allow experts to examine it, won't subject it to an adversarial system. So I think unless and until Dominion is prepared to become transparent about its machines, they should not win lawsuits.
Were you surprised by some of the discovery that's come out so far, Mr.
Oh
Dershowitz?
yeah, I was very surprised. I was pleased because I'm in favor of transparency, and the more we know, the better. And even in my suit, we learned a lot from emails that showed the hypocrisy of some of the commentators and of the network bosses. And I think we're entitled to see how the sausage is made if we're a consumer of the sausage, and we all watch television. And so we have to know what goes into those programs when they come out with such certainty, and behind the scenes, people are anything but certain. So I think it served an important function.
What's interesting, before we move on to Donald Trump, just how tribal news coverage has become. I know that you've talked about that yourself in terms of the receptiveness of different media organizations.
Sure.
What have you seen, not necessarily over the course of your career, even the last few years? What's changed?
Yeah, I'll just make it very personal. I was the first law professor to write regularly for the New York Times. I did more op-eds, more letters to the editor, more book reviews than any other lawyer. I was their regular lawyer person. They would never have a story about constitutional law, or rarely, without consulting me. I'm now completely canceled by the New York Times since the day I defended Donald Trump on the floor of the Senate. I haven't had an op-ed. I haven't had a book review. I haven't been quoted by the New York Times. I can deal with that, but I think the readers are deprived of something. If the Times thought I was important enough to use me as their primary source of legal analysis, they thought the readers should have access to my views, but now they've denied the readers access to my views, as has CNN, as has MSNBC, and it just contributes to the polarization of news sources. You can only get my views now from stations like Fox and others that tend to be on the right side. I tend to be more on the left side, or center liberal, but my views are no longer available to readers. NPR doesn't quote me very much anymore. So it's part of the tribalization of the media, and it really deprives listeners and viewers of the whole picture.
Yeah. Well, it's always interesting to judge a lawyer by the company he keeps, given the nature of your job, isn't it? But talk about, so you've got this book, Get Trump, and of course, I know you've had a lot of thoughts about the current case in New York. What have you seen? We've now had a few days. We've seen, of course, what Alan Bragg has come out with. What's been your reaction?
Well, he labored mightily and produced a mouse called Mickey. It's a Mickey Mouse case. There's nothing to it. Let me give you the theory of the misdemeanor prosecution before we even get to the felony. The misdemeanor prosecution is that Donald Trump paid $130,000 to assure that a woman, Stormy Daniels, didn't reveal her allegation that she committed adulterous sex with Donald Trump. The purpose of the payment was to keep it quiet. Bragg says, however, he then should have put it in his public corporate forms describing exactly why he paid $130,000. Has anybody ever in the history of hush money or non-disclosure agreements ever then disclosed the reason? From the time Alexander Hamilton paid hush money to Mrs. Reynolds back in the 18th century, nobody has ever revealed the reason for doing it. Hamilton eventually did it because he was extorted again, claiming the money came from Treasury funds. But in general, when you pay hush money, the reason is to keep it quiet. But Bragg says, no, if you pay hush money, you then have to disclose it on corporate forms. I've challenged him to find a single case in history where anybody has been prosecuted for failure to disclose the reasons or the basis for a hush money payment. He can't do it. And he looked in the camera and said, oh, this is our bread and butter. We do this all the time. No, you don't. You never do it. It's never done. You invented this crime. What happened is he ran for office, promising to get Trump. You know, my title, Get Trump, is not so creative or original. It comes from the campaigns of Letitia James, the Attorney General, and Bragg, the district attorney. He promised to get them. He gets elected. He then rummages through the statutes. He can't find anything. So he says, I'm not going to get them. My predecessors didn't get him. I'm not going to get him. His assistants quit. New Yorkers have a backlash. They attack him. They're furious. The New York Times is critical. And then he changes his mind and says, all right, I'll find something. But he couldn't find anything. So he made it up. Basically, it's a made up, trumped up charge.
What is the danger? What's the potential damage you see in a case like this going forward?
I think Republicans will do the same thing. When they have Republican DAs, they're going to start targeting and going after Democrats. And we're going to get to a system whereby first you find the man and then you discover the crime. And that's what the head of the KGB said to Stalin, show me the man and I'll find you the crime. And it won't apply only to men. It'll apply to women, to men, to people who are political opponents. And what we're seeing is the weaponization of our criminal justice system, which is a terrible, terrible danger to all Americans. Today it's Trump, tomorrow it's a Democrat. Day after tomorrow it's your Uncle Charlie and your niece. And nobody is going to be safe from prosecutors. First, we ought to change the ethical rules. No prosecutor categorically should ever be allowed to run for office on the promise to get somebody. That should be unethical. That should be disbarable. No prosecutor should ever run on the promise to get anybody.
What about presidents? I know that President Trump, certainly, I'm thinking back to the first election with the lock her up. Was that just rhetoric? That's a very different situation, obviously.
Well, look, I think it overstates it, you know, to say the law is corrupt. There are corrupt elements within the law, and they can be cured. This is an easy fix. Don't allow prosecutors to run to try to get somebody. Don't allow prosecutors to target people. You must find the crime. Justice Jackson, the greatest attorney general in our history, warned his prosecutors, saying any prosecutor can rummage through the statutes and regulations and find something to blame anybody on. Don't do that. That's not the American way.
Let me ask quickly before we sum up. There's a couple of other cases, obviously, that President Trump's facing. He's got the case in Georgia. He's got Washington.
Right.
Are those much stronger cases in your mind?
They are. In Get Trump, I go through each of the cases and I evaluate their strength. The strongest case is Florida, where plainly he was in possession of what the government believes is classified material. He'll say he declassified. That's a question of fact. They're also going after him on some obstruction of justice charges. What prevents the prosecution there, at least on the classified material, is that Biden and Pence had classified material, and can you single out Trump? But there they have a strong case legally. But in Georgia and in D.C., they have a very weak case legally. In Georgia, the tape says, I have to find, F-I-N-D. That means they're there. Find has a dictionary definition. It's not made up. What he was telling his people is there are votes. They haven't been counted. Look hard, find them. Yep. I don't think you can prosecute for that. Yep. The same thing is true of January 6th. I hated that speech. I think it was wrong. It's one of the good reasons that I have never to vote for Donald Trump. I always voted twice for his opponents. I plan to vote for his opponent the third time. But in January 6th speech, he said, I want you to protest peacefully and patriotically. That brings it within the First Amendment. And so I think that the New York case is the weakest, but I don't think any of the four cases will actually result in legitimate prosecutions and convictions. Now, there can be convictions because in New York, a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, but it will also convict Donald Trump, whether he's guilty or not. If you have people who voted for Bragg on the campaign pledge to get Trump and then they're serving on the jury, it's not going to be easy to get a fair trial. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to continuing the conversation. Alan, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.